Okay, so hi, my name is Iyad Rahwan. I come originally from Syria, from a town called Aleppo, that you might be familiar with from the news. And after some years in Boston, working at MIT, I moved to Berlin to help lead this institute, the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. And I started a center called the Center for Humans and Machines. So my background is computer science, but I work with teams of computer scientists and behavioral scientists to explore questions that are emerging because of the technology we have today and the technology we might have tomorrow. So I just want to give you some examples. One of our most well-known projects is the Moral Machine Experiment. And the Moral Machine Experiment was a website that we launched a few years ago, which presents people with this dilemma, the dilemma of self-driving cars. So you have to imagine a self-driving car in the near future facing a situation where it could either run over 3 people and a dog, or swerve, hit the barrier, and kill the person in the car. Notice that these people are crossing a red light as well. Now, what do you think the car should do? People have found this really fascinating, and I'm sure people here would disagree about what the right thing to do is. Should we prioritize pedestrians? Should we care that this is a dog? Should we care that they are crossing a red light and the person in the car did nothing wrong? All kinds of opinions can be reasonable. This thing went viral in part because of all the media coverage from traditional media sources, but also from new media sources like YouTubers who would do kind of walkthroughs in this game and talk about all the agonizing pain that they were experiencing as they were seeing one dilemma after another. And this helped us really crowdsource tens of millions of answers to these dilemmas from all over the world. And we published this work a couple of years ago together with a team of economists and anthropologists, which really allowed us to explore not just what people agree on what the car should do, but also how they differ in their opinions. And in terms of projects, I've done a whole bunch of similar projects that are always trying to push the technology to identify what is possible next. So a few years ago, I led a team that won the US State Department Tech Challenge, where we used social media to identify people within 12 hours in a remote city without having any kind of access to infrastructure. We didn't even know, we just saw their mugshot in the morning. I also did projects like the Nightmare Machine, which took new deep learning technologies that allow you to transfer the style of one image to another to basically make something like the Media Lab picture more of a horror movie. And this, for me, is what followed from this is studies of how machines can get better and better at manipulating our emotions. We also worked on projects that, with AI that generates text, and we launched Shelley, which is a bot on Twitter that writes horror stories with people. And you could, they're very short stories. And finally, we created this project, which is almost beginning to get into an art project, more than a science project, called Norman, where we trained an image captioning algorithm to look at pictures and predict what's in them. And those Rorschach tests, they're kind of bogus, but many people are familiar with them. So if you feed this picture to a normal AI image captioning algorithm, it would say a group of birds sitting on top of a tree branch. But if you train the AI with bad data, which is what we did on purpose, this is what it sees: a man being electrocuted and catches to death. Now, one of my moments of pride is when The Onion wrote a story about this, and they could not make it more absurd than what we actually did. So they simply described what we did. And with that, I'll hand over to Christoph.
Yeah. Hello, I'm just going to do the second quick introduction. Just a quick thing that he forgot to mention is that he's also a fantastic cartoonist. So one day he actually came a year ago over to the studio to pick something up, and we ended up chatting 2 hours about cartooning and algorithms, which are the only 2 relevant themes in the world, in my opinion. My name is Christoph. I'm an illustrator, and being an illustrator means that I spend my entire day doing this, quite literally. So I sit at my desk, and I'm usually in a very foul mood, hoping that eventually that foul mood produces an image that sometimes even ended up on the cover of the New Yorker, where the themes are anything relating to contemporary life, often about living in the big city, but sometimes also on very, very short deadlines, which I very much enjoy, working on political themes. So that was when the US, or actually all different armies, like retreated from Afghanistan and trying to take this very complex image and distill it into an image that somehow encapsulates the mood that I think a couple of people felt. When I said I always sit at my desk, that was a lie. Sometimes I leave my desk. So this was for a story for National Geographic, where I actually went almost to the North Pole on a ship with a camera and my pencils. And yes, that was very excited, and you are right to be jealous. Another time I went to the Mekong River, which was also beautiful. In that case, there were no polar bears, but fantastic monkeys, and I brought my inks for that. I also work in different technologies. I love experimenting with technology. So this was a VR sketchbook I did at the North Korean, South Korean border. And usually you cannot photograph there. So I went there with a pencil sketchbook and made small drawings that I later turned into these kind of like 360 drawings at my desk. And the craziest thing I ever did is I ran the New York City Marathon, and I sketched it as I was running it and live tweeting it. And it took me a year of preparation, and I finished in 6 hours, because that's usually the only question people have. The other thing that actually consumes a lot of my time these days, I come up with these nonsensical images, which I then put on Instagram. And the great thing is I don't have to pitch them to anybody, I can just throw them out there. And yeah, the one thing I actually try to do with my art is create some sort of emotional reaction. And this is really something where I think the two of us are rather close, that our art is really not so much about our own vanity, but rather how we kind of connect to people. And so the whole question with predictability really relates to the creative process. So how do you create these images? And I think the biggest misconception people tend to have about the creative process is that we experience art as like aha, as like kind of like an exciting moment, whereas the creation of art is, of course, a very slow artist process. You never laugh at your own joke because you spend rewriting it 1,000 times until you then present it to somebody. And my process is kind of in that term very traditional, as I mentioned earlier, like me sitting at the desk. You work with so many different technologies, so I think your process is a lot more modern and more variable than mine.
Well, I think maybe if we move.
Yeah, I'll just keep on clicking through different things.
Yeah, so I am familiar a little bit with what Christoph is talking about in terms of just coming up with drawings. So I started this project called Evil AI Cartoons, which is an educational project aimed to explain AI ethics and AI safety and risk to lay people, and kind of try to distill complex ideas into a simple, basically single panel New Yorker style cartoon. And, but for me, and this is also obviously challenging, I have to sit down and think about the idea before I even begin to draw anything. But then when it comes to using kind of something that looks like art to engage the public in a scientific experiment, it's even more agonizing, because you're trying to design something like the Moral Machine website. It has to be as easy and quick to understand as a New Yorker cartoon, but at the same time, it has to have scientific value. There's behind it something like, there's an experiment running, and there's like statistics that we plan to run with the data, and so on. And for me, this adds on top of it. So you have to think of the research question while also thinking of like marketing and how to make it interesting and engaging to people. So is this something that you face, Christoph, as well, when you're producing content that tries to capture the interest but also shape what people are thinking about?
Yeah, but the one part where I really enjoy my work is when I have a problem. So for example, when I do coding, and there's this one moment where you have to kind of come to a certain result, which is like the closest I come ever to science on a level of a 4-year-old, I guess. But at least then I know what I want. And I think the greatest challenge that I usually face is that I have to create the problem as I create the solution. Because for art, when you write a novel or do a painting, there is no assignment. There's not like a result that you want to achieve. It happens hopefully organically. And I think the amazing thing, and it was like just seeing Refik Anadol there in the stage, who I'm a huge fan of, and the amazing thing is he creates these insane sculptures, and you see them and you feel, I always needed them. I just didn't know that, and he couldn't know that we needed them. And so I think it's the same when you kind of see a great, read a novel, hear music, that it almost kind of cures a pain that you didn't know you had until that very moment. And I think, again, for me, it's kind of like a traditional thing, because once I kind of created that thing, my work is done, and I can just present it to the audience, where with you, often it continues from that point.
In some way, yeah, I would say so, in some way. So in my work, in many ways, so when I create something like the Moral Machine website or this Nightmare Machine, it's presenting something that's meant to engage people in some way, but then as they engage with it, they generate data. So they choose what they think the car should do or something like that. And when they do this, they're telling me about something about the way humans think, about how a machine should behave. I could take this data, analyze it, and I learn something from them. And this shapes the next research question, because then the next experiment is going to be in part informed by the answers that we got. So there's kind of unpredictability in the answers, which I think relates a little bit to the unpredictability that you have. When you draw something and it means something to you, but you don't know exactly how it's going to land. And I feel like, and the same thing with like cartoons or jokes, you don't know exactly how it's going to land. And I think there's a parallel with the scientific method where you don't know what the answer is, because if you did, why would you do the experiment, right?
I read this fantastic book by, I think, Ed Catmull, who is one of the animators from Pixar, and he talks about new ideas and kind of creativity at large. And one of the things he mentions, which I thought was kind of eye-opening to me, was the problem of pitching creative ideas. Because how can you pitch something that you haven't created yet? And I think this puts, especially artists in a huge bind, where they say, oh, I'm going to do something amazing, it's going to go viral. Like, how would I know? The only thing I could predict is something that's really derivative, something that I've done kind of 50 times before. And this is a challenge for me, which I often, like these days, I actually try to create art on my own and then only kind of show it to the world when it's done. I feel you have kind of two problems. Like when you do a cartoon, of course, you throw it out there and it works or it doesn't. But you work in the science work where you have to pitch. Like things are too expensive for you to just kind of like do a 3-year project and then say, I just was not really what I wanted. But how, like these things are so amorphous. How do you go out there and convince people to fund you when you don't know what they're actually getting?
I mean, having my job allows me to not have to do that so much because the way the Max Planck Society works is with trust. Like you have your budget and you work on kind of blue sky ideas, and this is what allows me to think about the future. So this is the thing that we're calling now science fiction science. So we sort of imagine future scenarios like this. People, a teacher is teaching the kids how to cross the street, and because autonomous cars stop always, she's teaching them never to look to both sides. And I think, for me, this cartoon kind of captures this possibility that maybe when the machines are so reliable, they teach us bad habits, right? Because, if like Alexa doesn't shout at you if you insult it, then maybe it will be, kids and humans will become more likely to insult other people, right? So I think for me, it's like this process of producing the cartoons is almost also the process of producing research questions.
Yeah.
It's like it's a so it acts as a cartoon for people, but also it acts as a brainstorming session for me, and I find that quite fun.
Yeah. No, and in terms of the whole predictability question, of course, the biggest fear you have as an artist is that you are afraid of becoming predictable. That people kind of go like, oh, there he goes again, oh, I like your previous work better because you're just repeating yourself. And I think that the biggest way out of that, or like the thing that makes me kind of like sleep at night, is knowing that the vocabulary changes because people change. And that basically, since society changes, I change, ultimately there's basically no other way than kind of like to change the kind of like the images that we use to kind of like navigate these things.
That's right. So I guess the one way to kind of wrap up is to say that I feel like there's a lot of commonalities between, there's all kinds of science, but one kind of science is the science of understanding contemporary issues and their impact on human behavior, and maybe even future technologies and their impact on human behavior. And I think that kind of science faces similar challenges to the creative process as art does, because you're constantly trying to keep up with something that is constantly moving. So in your case, I guess in the case of art, it's the artistic flavor and people's taste is changing quickly and being constructed by the artistic process itself. And for us, there's something similar to that, combined with the fact that technology itself is also moving and changing rapidly. So we have to keep up interesting, we kind of have to keep up on top of things and participate in shaping them as well.
Well, we will continue this discussion later on outside, and yeah, I just arrived, unfortunately, this afternoon, so I'm looking forward to meeting about half of you later. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.